2013 was a great year for British movie making. Despite an overall decline in the number of films going into production, increased investment led to many successes, both creative and commercial. Unfortunately, it was also the year of Run for Your Wife, a notorious catastrophe which most definitely did not rank amongst them. It's reported that in 2013, 91% of UK box office revenue came from only 14% of the movies shown in our theatres. In its opening weekend, this hilarious bigamy farce took roughly £600. At the time, Vice magazine calculated that this thing would need to run for another 65 years to break even. Danny Dyer stars as cabbie John Smith, seen here emerging from a car wash to a painfully banal theme song. As we'll see, his life is one of generic London landmarks, contrived banter, and wholly unnecessary cameos. Let's be fair, this film is a lovey fest. It features over 80 performances by actors who, quite laudably, donated their fees to a theatrical charity. However, this doesn't excuse the fact that they are completely unnecessary, and that one of them is Rolf Harris. Oh, good on you, mate. John's chipper mood is ruined when he sees Dame Judi Dench being accosted by a couple of drama students. His chivalry is rewarded with a blow to the head. Unfortunately for him, it's not severe enough to excuse him from the rest of filming. As a bigamist, John obviously has two wives. There's Michelle, played by Denise Van Outen, who is infuriatingly neurotic throughout. The second is Steph, played by Girls Aloud alumni Sarah Harding, who, and I'm being charitable here, is a complete block of wood. Naturally, John lives his life according to a very specific schedule, which allows him to spend equal amounts of time deceiving the two women he claims to love. Naturally concerned, his wives, in the meantime, have begun ringing round local police stations and hospitals.
He was due back at 12 o'clock last night.
And he was due back at 7:30 this morning.
At this point, we're introduced to D.S. Troughton, who's from the Stockwell station. And in many ways I consider him to be the true hero of this story, because he has some semblance of common sense. Stoned on painkillers, and I really wish I was, John forgets that Harry's schedule is supposed to work, and tells his ride home that he needs to go to Stockwell, and to the flat that he shares with Michelle.
Now, 104 Stockwell Place, yeah?
Hey, that's my address too.
It's here that we're introduced to our irritating pissant for the day.
Hey.
Gary, played by Neil Morrison.
What the hell's happened to you, mate?
Allow me.
He has no problem about answering other people's phones, and he learns that the local newspaper has heard about John's heroism and wants to come round and do a story.
The two youths ran off.
Yeah, down Waterloo Road.
You'll never guess who's just been on the phone.
Shush!
And it all ended up with me being hit by a handbag.
Gay muggers? That's new, Sergeant.
Ah yes, the gay jokes. And I can tell you that they're all as hilarious as each other.
Gardner, wasn't it, sir?
But you can call me Gary.
I know what I'd call you, sir.
While we've been enjoying that comedy, Steph has arrived at the Finsbury police station.
You've had time to email every hospital in the country.
I keep telling you, madam, our computer went down, but it's sorted now.
My husband could be lying in a hospital bed on one of those vibrators.
Okay. Learning that John's about to appear in the newspaper, Michelle's concern for his health devolves quite quickly.
I'll wear black because I thought you'd been killed.
Naturally nervous, John finally explains to Gary what's going on. Gary, being the respectable citizen he is, does what anyone would, and decides to become an accomplice.
Gonna be your accomplice? Gary wants filling in, mate.
John explains to Gary how he and Steph first met. I'm just guessing, but I presume she was won over by his kind nature and good sense of humour. And he probably saw pictures of her in the 2006 Ultimo catalogue. The reporters arrive, and Gary throws himself on the grenade, for some reason, and tells them that he is John Smith.
Yeah.
John's finally able to call Steph, and he begins digging himself in deeper with a bizarre story about a affair he had at Luton Airport, and how he's ended up on a farm.
I'm sorry.
Meanwhile, Gary's cover is blown when next-door neighbour Susie reveals that he is in fact not John Smith, and she's turned up with a cake. for some reason. Here we see John betraying his Cockney roots, trying to rappel out of his bedroom window using bed sheets, much like folk hero Jack Shepherd. Unfortunately, unlike the case of Jack Shepherd, this won't end with a hanging.
John!
I need a bit more practice.
Up next, slipping on a banana.
Oh, my baby, my baby!
Recovering, John bundles into the back of a taxi, losing his bed sheets as he goes. Man, Indiana Jones 5's sorely lacking in ambition. Michelle leaves with the reporter, and Susie for some reason, though she is careful to leave the cake with Gary. D.S. Troughton returns, though unfortunately without a tactical firearms unit. So John finally arrives in Finsbury, and he proceeds to the police station where finally everything is straightened out.
My wife made a little mistake and I've been found and... oh, I'm as fit as a fiddle.
Oh well, movie's over. Brilliant. Good night.
Our sergeant's gone round to your place in Lewin Road to give your wife the good news.
What?
Fuck! Has it been this long since our last cameo? Or how about Christopher Biggins? Seen here digging deep into his repertoire of the same character he's played in everything ever. He portrays Bobby, who's John's neighbour in Finsbury. He's introduced to another policeman, Porterhouse, and informs him that Steph is no longer there, and that maybe he should look in the sports section for her.
You behave yourself with all those titty-witties.
John turns up in Finsbury, and Bobby tells him about the policeman. Unfortunately, Porterhouse is already with Steph, and she's giving him the Luton cover story. Back in Stockwell, D.S. Troughton is giving Gary a classic shakedown. In fact, Gary is so intimidated, he ends up leaping onto the cake.
Oh, Mr. Gardner.
The pacing of this film is absurd. It just does not stop. You have no breathing space to try and learn anything about these characters. There's no opportunity to try and build any kind of rapport with them. You don't really watch Run for Your Wife so much as you have it flash before your eyes.
Don't stop now!
Around the halfway mark, I needed a respite from this thing. I went downstairs to make a cup of tea, and I noticed that the dishes from breakfast hadn't been done. This film is so gripping and engaging that it makes household chores appealing. Anyway, now I have clean cups, what's happening back at the movie?
Right. Got fun, John. In Finsbury. Paper.
Why are you helping him? It looks like poo. John learns that he's become big news, and in a stellar moment of improvisation, decides to swallow the front page of the local paper. So begins a frantic dash around town, trying to secure every copy of The Echo, and apparently to remind Sue Pollard what it's like to appear in front of the camera. Back in Finsbury, Bobby and his partner Cyril, paid by Lionel Blair, appear to be setting up a micro-budget version of The Shining.
You're enough to make anybody go straight, you are!
Troughton ambushes John as he enters the Finsbury flat, and it looks like the jig is up.
The reason I've got 2 flats is because... well, we're a pair, aren't we?
A pair of what?
Ah.
Excuse me a moment.
Good, I got straight.
Michelle calls the flat, thinking it's actually the Finsbury Park police station. Troughton answers, and he explains what's been going on with John and Gary, and he outs them to Michelle, who promptly comes over to confront the happy couple. John sees the error of his ways, and he decides to do the decent thing. So he swaps the door numbers around on his and Cyril's apartment, meaning that Michelle will end up going to the wrong place.
Oh my God.
Sensing that this movie wouldn't make any money, the producers take part in some gratuitous product placement. It's also at this point that we get to meet Robin Asquith, 70s comedic dinosaur, whose most famous role involved spying on schoolgirls while they were in the shower. To solidify his master plan, John needs to get himself and Gary into Bobby and Cyril's apartment. Fortunately, Cyril came crashing through the ceiling earlier, creating a hole for them to climb through. Michelle arrives and begins kicking her way into Bobby and Cyril's apartment. The ruckus causes Steph to come upstairs, and hilariously, John loses his trousers while he and Gary are trying to climb through the hole. Michelle charges in and she finds Gary and John in a compromising and powerfully erotic position. Finally, we're going to get our reckoning. Having found out about Gary's involvement with her husband, Michelle suddenly learns that there's also a fancy woman downstairs, namely Steph. Once again, John needs to salvage this situation. So, John, what are you going to come up with?
I'm going to tear her guts out.
No, listen. That lady, she's not a tart.
A whore, then.
No, she's not a whore. She's not a tart. She's a fella.
How many opportunities is this guy going to pass up to do the right thing? Farce, screwball comedy, it doesn't matter. Any currency this guy had as a likeable character was exhausted very long time ago.
Well, he's part of your kinky setup as well, is he?
Well, no, actually, he's a friend of Gary's.
What fucking planet are these people on? Apparently a fabricated homosexual affair is enough to placate your first wife, so clearly outing your second wife as Gary's trans lover is enough to bring it on home. I'm surprised by how seemingly affectionate Michelle is in this scene. I mean, she's just learned that her whole life and marriage is a lie, and yet there she is clinging on to him for comfort. I mean, am I the only one who finds that slightly demeaning?
The face is great, but the boobs, wow.
It's Sarah Harding! And so, mercifully, we near the end. And Run for Your Wife closes with a final showdown between John and Diaz Troughton.
Shove it right up my jacksie.
Troughton recounts his report of the events of that day, and it's at this point that John finally decides he needs to fess up.
I'm a bigamist.
You lying bastard.
You could classify this film as a horror movie, because the fact that something so lazy and ill-conceived could see the light of day is fucking terrifying. It's based upon a play which ran successfully for 9 years from its 1983 debut, and you couldn't blame the original playwright, Ray Cooney, for being pissed at this thing. Unfortunately, not only did Cooney adapt the original screenplay, he also co-directed this fecal matter. It is lazy, and it's clearly a prime example of something which was more fun to make than it is to watch. It trades on past glories and makes no concession to modern sensibilities of humour and taste, which is something you might expect even for a purely commercial reason. Every character is annoying, and you never have any opportunity to care about any of them. I can't even recommend this film in a so bad it's good way, because there is just nothing here. There is no humour whatsoever. It is devoid of all charm and likeability. However, it is impressive for being the first movie I've seen which threatens its audience in the end credits.
I'm fed up with this